Welcome to the stage, Roger Martella. Roger is EVP and the Chief Corporate Affairs Officer of GE Vernova. I thought we could invite, Roger in this. I mean, sure. I'm just inventing this as we go along. So, Roger, welcome to see you. You know Jared Egan. I mean, you should spend more time with him. I think Jared has a tough job, but he's got a great title, and so I would take the job if it were offered to me. But I am interested to sort of listen to these areas. And one of the areas we're going to get into later is nuclear. Right? And we're also going to talk about fusion this morning. We're going to talk about fusion, what's going on the nuclear front. And so that takes me to you, Roger, when we kind of think about, GE Vernova, your stock is booming. You're basically bringing on lots of power, not only here, but around the world. But as you look at American growth and what it needs, you just heard Jared. I would just ask you, what do we have look forward to? And, what ought to be warning signs?
Well, the numbers, Steve, thank you. And thank you to Jared. I mean, the numbers just speak for themselves.
You like Jared?
I'd like to think we're friends, right? We find ourselves in the same circles very frequently. And that's, as you said, Jared has a very difficult job. His job is critical. He has to succeed. It's an imperative that he succeed for the country, for competitiveness, for jobs, for manufacturing. We're here to serve. We don't go, when we meet with Jared, we don't ask him for anything. We just ask him, how can we serve him? How can we serve the administration? Because if he succeeds, we all succeed. So the criticality of his job weighs on us a lot. And luckily, I appreciate the relationship. As you know, I have to fly from here to our board meeting up in Massachusetts right after this. And one of the things I'm going to say to the board is someone who's been in Washington for 30 years. Lots of good things about different administrations. I've never seen so much access to people, just people willing to meet, listen, and to partner. And that's a credit to Jared and others that he's leading. And so I think the numbers just speak for themselves. If we look what we've done since the inauguration, we're one company, GE Vernova. We produce about half, our equipment produces about half of the electricity in the United States. We've announced $750 million in investments in our factories, about 1,850 jobs. Every single Monday in the United States, we have about a dozen to 2 dozen people showing up for the first time on our factories, getting their IDs and going to work to build equipment in this country, in our 18 factories that we need to help Jared succeed. So those numbers speak for themselves. That's just the first 12 months, not even that, and there's a lot more to go.
I'm going to give Jared an opportunity to ask you a question. And I say, what should they, I'll ask you, ask him what you want him to do more of.
Well, we want more of his gas turbines.
So what's the gas turbine problem?
There are a few companies that make them. They are experts at making them. They are one of the leaders in the world at making them. They're the American company that makes them, and they are hugely vital to the success of power in America. And so this partnership is extremely important. It's key. And we've had this conversation in my office. I mean, anything you guys need to get it done, and that's what he's talking about. I mean, what he's saying of the growth they're in, that's exactly what we want to hear, because they're going to be a huge part of solving this power crisis problem we have. And they're doing an amazing job at it.
Roger, when you hear this gas turbines, are you devoting this gas turbine production to the U.S. side? Who's our biggest competitor in your world that's getting the rest of the GE Vernova gas turbines?
Right, on gas turbines, so $300 million alone, 800 jobs just in the U.S. on gas turbines, more to do. We want to serve the U.S. market, and we will serve the U.S. market. What we're doing with advancing our capacity is for us to manage the growing demand while keeping the backlog, keeping the years about the same. But the administration, I think through the president's policies, has also opened new markets for us. We've announced $14 billion in deals with Saudi Arabia, the president's first international trip. Jared mentioned Japan recently. We've announced up to $100 billion in sales of our small modular nuclear reactor to Japan. And I think we've struck a balance. I'd say we did have some tense relationships. I know you always like a little bit of controversy. We had some difficult relationships over the summer.
Love it.
Where there was a legitimate debate inside the White House, if I may. Should we only be serving the U.S. market, or do we have the room to help serve the president's allies? I'd like to think we've resolved that, and we've found some nice equilibrium where the administration's now helping us do both.
We'll talk about it after, Rob.
No, but Jared, are there tensions out there on the world versus us?
Oh, well, I mean, we have an America First approach, and so the president is always going to take that approach. Now, we have great allies, and we use that as leverage. The president uses energy diplomacy like nobody I've ever seen before. That is what has driven a lot of growth here in America. It is what is helping American companies. He is using the leverage we have as energy leaders, both in SMRs and transformers and LNG, to get historic trade deals done. And so that's what's happening in Europe, that's what's happening in Asia. And so he uses that as a stick that, with our allies, that has become hugely successful and is helping us.
Now, let me throw a curveball at you. I happened to interview President Paul Kagame of Rwanda yesterday. And Paul Kagame is going to be meeting with the president today, along with the president of the DRC. They're signing an agreement to hopefully end their ulcerous, conflict in the area. But they credit very directly President Trump's, they call it transactionalism, but creating an economic frame around this, particularly around critical materials and energy development and processing. But it's a U.S. design in a way, they're saying, Jared. And so I'm just interested in sort of, we look at these conflicts and we look at an economic frame around them. And they're connected to power and they're connected to materials. How much are you involved with those?
We're involved a lot. I mean, that's where that's what I'm saying. That is the beauty of how they've set up the council to have Lutnick and Besant and Jameson, who are on the ground working those deals, but they're working with us and saying, okay, where are we strong in these countries and what do we want? And so the whole energy scope, from critical minerals to nuclear to LNG, all of that fits into as we work on these trade deals.
Roger, I'm really interested in the other parts of the energy equation. And I know GE Vernova well enough that you're an all of the above company.
Yeah.
You play in all these different places. What do we need to scale more of?
We talked about gas turbines. I think the other news story of even the last 3 months, I say, is nuclear. Nuclear is something we've been talking about for a while. It seems like it was going to happen. It seems like it's going to happen. It is now happening. If you were to go 400 miles from here to Ontario, Canada, you'd see about 400 people today building the first small modular reactor in the West. We've got the pit excavated in concrete for the steam pressure reactor. We're building all that today. That's going to be online in 2029.
Is this your reactor?
This is our reactor. It'll be the first. But just this week, 2 days ago, Department of Energy announced an $800 million grant, $400 million of that to TVA to get going on their reactor. Secretary Lutnick helped us with up to $100 billion in SMRs to build here, thanks to Japan. And so this is really happening. We have earth-moving equipment out there today building this, and this has moved to the left much quicker than I would have anticipated even a few months ago because of the administration's policies.
Let me ask you a question about the kind of world scene. When I remember, and this is my view, folks, sorry, this is my own editorial, when Germany moved away from nuclear, I saw it as kind of a dereliction of responsibility in a way. I was very, very critical. I wrote about it because it made strategic choices for its partners. It put the burden on others to figure out what that was. And as you saw the Russian invasion of Ukraine, you saw Russia's brinkmanship with Ukraine, other nations with oil and gas supplies, it was a real problem. And so energy is just a very different tool out there, when you kind of look at it. I'm interested, Roger, if you look at a more weaponized energy side, how are we doing in the United States and also with our allies in making sure that kind of behavior doesn't keep coming up?
I think by putting energy as effectively the top one, top two policy around the world, not only did this country go to the polls in the US last year, 25% of the world went to the polls last year, and more since. And what we found, because we're a global company, we're in 100 countries, we serve about a third of the electricity in the world outside of China. What we found is similar to the US, everybody who got elected was elected because of the economy and elected because of energy and access to electricity. So when I go around the world, whether it's Brussels, the Middle East, just like you do, this is front and center on everybody's mind. So I think the world is unified. There may be different, whether it's AI in the US or energy security in Europe, competitiveness in the Middle East. The world is unified that this has to be the lifeblood of prosperity. It has to be the lifeblood of policy right now. If you can solve for electricity, then you'll solve for quality of life, you'll solve for prosperity, you'll solve for affordability. So this is, I think, the most I've ever seen in my generation, a new super cycle. And I'm super optimistic. I know you're an optimistic person too. I'm super optimistic if we deliver on this.
I'm not that optimistic.
Well, yeah. But
I worked for Richard Nixon. I thrive in cynicism.
But if we can deliver on this, if we can seize these policies and actually deliver on them, we will solve for prosperity in a way that we haven't in generations.
I am a bit of an Nixonian realist. I'm glad you mentioned that. So, but every once in a while, weak moments, I'm optimistic. But Jared, permitting reform. I mean, it's a big deal, and I'm glad you addressed it. I remember when we had various phases of what, Senator Manchin with some Republican and Democratic allies were trying to change that map a little bit in terms of, the oil and energy and gas and, all of the above picture. But I just want to come back to it for a moment because I hear people like you talk about it. I've interviewed tons of members of Congress on permitting reform, and I'm just finding, what's the nirvana moment, where we're going to move forward in a way that's fair, where the equilibrium is reset between all parties, because it does seem we're not moving very fast.
I think we're very close to that moment, if not at it. I am with you. We do not get the pushback from the Democratic side on permitting reform like I thought we would. I think everybody is on board with getting something passed and getting something passed soon. I'm very optimistic about it. I do think that I think the more that people look at what's happening in energy prices or electricity prices, particularly in the Northeast, where you get a lot of Democratic representatives, they're going to get even more on board because they're going to realize, like, you need the transmission. The generation of the power is not the problem. That's not what's driving costs. It's the transmission, and that's what's happening in a lot of these.
And how do you bake in legitimate and fair and square environmental concerns?
Well, I mean, they've gone way over to off the scale on it, and I think. We talk to these New England governors. They're realizing it. They're on board with nuclear. They're on board with gas now. They realize we've moved too far to one side on it, and it's their residents that are getting hurt by it. So they're on board. They're having legit common sense conversations with us because they know that they need the transmission.
Go ahead.
I mean, my background. I was the
he was EPA.
I was the EPA General Counsel.
You were Mr. EPA.
I was the Justice Department's lead permitting lawyer, litigator. I never lost a case. I believe these laws are sacrosanct.
Did you only take easy cases?
We can debate that. Some people would debate that. No, actually, they gave me harder and harder ones. But I believe these environmental laws are sacrosanct, and I will do anything to protect them. But Jared is exactly right. They've been distorted and used in a way that was never intended. And we need to protect the environmental reviews, and I've never heard anybody from this administration say otherwise. But the process has really been deployed in ways. And one of the things I've seen them do, beyond just going to Congress, is something takes 3 years to do. Jared just picks up the phone and calls somebody and say, why does this take 3 years? I want it in 3 months. Okay, we can do it in 3 months. We just normally, so even just this effect of picking up the phone and challenging some of the status quo has already made a significant difference.
Now, we've got a mic out here in the audience, right? We do have a mic. Where is the mic? Mic here. I'm going to go to Saul Anuzis. I'm going to just say, Saul, you used to run the Michigan Republican Party. I know you have strong views on environment and energy, and we'll give you an opportunity to pose a question.
No, I think this is a great conversation, and I appreciate both of your perspectives. And as we look at growing the economy, I think that today I represent a senior citizens group, and energy is one of the main costs for seniors and people on fixed income. And so when you look across the country, and I don't care if
it's called? It's called 60 Plus?
Yeah, it's a 60 Plus association. We're 35 years old this year, and we're one of the oldest advocacy groups out there. But from our perspective, it doesn't matter what state you're in, whether it's a Republican state or a Democratic state in East or West. I mean, energy costs continue to be a very large percentage of everybody's income. And so, I think as you're looking at supply, and I do think the infrastructure is a big part of it, but you take a look at what happened at the White House yesterday with the auto companies talking about the investments that are going to happen in Michigan. Those are all going to take energy as well. So I'm very intrigued on the nuclear part, especially these mini nuclear plants, and many of the AI folks that we've talked to are doing their own nuclear plants. Could you maybe just expand on that a little bit? Because I do think
this is what makes Jared's job great and impossible at the same time, right?
Well, I do think, it's an excellent point, and this is where this partnership is going to be key. The speed that nuclear is advancing is rapid right now. And since the president put out the nuclear EOs in the spring, we have seen massive investment in nuclear, and companies like GE are leaders on it. And so the long-term bet is around nuclear. Right now we got to get the natural gas into areas and the short term. But the long-term bet that's going to solve this ultimate problem is on nuclear. And I do think because of the innovation happening at places like GE, nuclear is going to come on faster than we all think, because that investment has been like a fire has been lit under it, and it is happening. And there is a lot happening on nuclear right now across the country with companies like this on SMRs and other things. And I think nuclear is going to be part of our energy scope faster than we all think.
Let me just ask you real quickly in our last few seconds here, both of you, Are we I know that China is a rival. I tend to think the way to beat a rival is investing in yourself and building things. But I'm very interested in how you move from hyperventilation to like solid understanding where we are, what we need to do, playbooks, strategy documents, and benchmarks in how we're doing against China. Are we doing that in a serious way, both in industry and government? Are we benchmarking where we need to be, where they are, where we're slipping, where we're gaining? Jared?
Well, I think what I have seen on the critical minerals front in particular, I think we're taking a systematic approach that they've never taken in the U.S. government before, investing like we've never invested before, but systematically looking at that periodic table. How are we going to get ahead? And that is happening on the critical minerals front.
Roger?
I'd say the same on the industry side. We can only speak in big sound bites and opportunities like this or other brief discussions. But
You can go micro.
But in the room, I think both the government and the industry are being quite pragmatic and saying, what are the priorities? How do we triage it? What do we need to do here sooner? Maybe we don't have to do everything today. There's some things that are less critical. How do we focus on the things that really matter and build that now? I'll just give you one quick example. Forgings and castings, like the fundamental building block of a manufacturing economy. We don't have the ability in the US today to kind of create the forgings for the things we need to produce these technologies. We're starting with that. The administration's starting with that. They're bringing it back. We're supporting it. And with those building blocks, we're going to go step by step.
Well, I've got a really smart guy from NVIDIA to kind of talk about the next dimension and why all this is happening. But I want to thank you both for coming to talk at the Whitehall Show on the American Growth Summit. Roger Martella, Executive Vice President, Chief Corporate Affairs Officer of GE Vernova, and the great Jared Agan, who's Executive Director of the Energy Dominance Council in the White House. Thank you so much.
Thanks.